and tell me why every Christian on the planet shouldn't view Essence of Thought and his fans as enemies and deal with them accordingly as the enemies they appear to want to be. That's my question. Tweet it out and call me crazy. Also send it to Steve McRae and ask him what he thinks.
Wait, was that a fucking threat? I'm being serious here. That right there seemed to be a rather vague insinuation of a threat with the whole, and deal with them accordingly as the enemies they appear to want to be. That could be considered a borderline terrorist threat. Though disguised as a question, in effect said person is making the statement that I, as well as those in support of me, should be dealt with as the enemy. And they do so whilst enlarging a picture of me on screen. So who is making said threat? Well, that would be Maxine Esmay, a man whose 50 minutes of fame consisted of appearing in The Red Pill, the documentary film directed by Cassie J that explored the misnamed men's rights movement, of which he was part of. For those who don't know, the so-called men's rights movement centers around playing whataboutism anytime a feminist discusses a specific issue related to gender. If the feminist discusses wage gap, both raw and accounting for secondary factors caused by gendered expectations, the men's rights movement cries, "But what about male depression?" When a woman discusses her personal experience of rape and sexual assault, the men's rights movement cries, "Well, what about the fact that men can also be raped?" However, their interest typically vanishes the moment you remove said people from the proximity of an outspoken feminist discussing active ways to improve the lives of women. So-called men's rights activists have no desire nor plan to actually resolve the gender-specific issues men face, all of which can be drawn back to the notions of toxic masculinity, i.e. that men are not permitted to seek psychological help as that woman-like and thus inferior and makes them triggered snowflakes, allowing incredibly horrific mental fatigue to set in, resulting in depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies. Likewise, it's not women who tell men, including young teenagers who have been sexually assaulted by figures of authority, that they should be happy with what happened to them. The cries of, "Where were these teachers when I was at school?" setting a sickening precedent that degrades the victim to a sick joke. Not that MRA such as Maxine Esmay cares, because apparently women and feminism are responsible for the very way men have treated portions of men as acceptable collateral in maintaining the very systems feminism is fighting. Now, I've only met a single person who uses a title similar to men's rights activist who I could respect, and that was a good friend of mine who helped me found my university's Atheist, Humanist and Secular Society, but he used the title Men's Health Advocate and was accepted with open arms, not to mention given time to talk at my university's Feminist Society. Repeatedly. Why? Well, because his concern wasn't a disingenuous smokescreen designed to shield him from the facts that he's actually just a misogynist prick with an axe to grind against women, as with people like Maxine Esmay. Now since then, Maxine Esmay has founded the Red Pill Religion Project, where he seems to have dragged the same rhetoric, the same tools, the same libelous methods he developed in one sphere over to the other. He completely inverses reality to make out that the abusers are actually the oppressed, that the secularists fighting religious encroachment into every aspect of society, including the government, and attempts to get lords who hold religious establishments accountable to their actions like everyone else, that us doing so is bigotry, is oppression, is abuse against the reigning theocratic monstrosity. Again, I'm only referring to what was said as a borderline terroristic threat on advice of my legal advisor. It at least has elements of that, even if it doesn't amount to that in full. The reason I note this is the distinction between a terroristic threat and a call to violence. I don't know the intent behind this remark. I don't know if it was intended to get me to back down if I watch said segment, or whether it's genuinely designed to induce violence against both me and my fans. By the way, neither a terroristic threat nor a call to violence has to be direct. So framing said threat as a question that assumes said threat as a default answer in need of challenge, that in no way spares Maxine Esmay from said charge. Now I know Maxine Esmay has no intention of acting on this himself, that was never in my mind. But the fact that he had the audacity to say such a thing is still incredibly horrendous and if nothing else, puts out the message that calling for violence against atheists as a quote, enemy, either directly or indirectly, is perfectly legitimate. This statement most likely has zero power on its own, but repeat it often with enough people across a period of time, and it can normalize said act and even desensitize us to the fact of what's taking place. So I'm putting my foot down here and saying, no, I will not tolerate this, I will not ignore this, in hopes that maybe Maxine Esmay realizes that if he keeps doing this shit, he's going to end up in a legal shithole, and I'll be the one to put him there if I have to. Now, some people are likely wondering whether I'm taking things out of context or if I'm blowing things out of proportion. Well, perhaps if this comment had been made on its own, such an argument could be stretched. Unnaturally, but it could be stretched. But it isn't. During the very same hangout, Maxine Esmay launches an array of charges against myself, the channel, and its viewers. I'd just like to play two of said clips to give you a greater understanding of what the statement, and deal with them accordingly as the enemies they appear to want to be, followed on from. The first one is an opening segment which I actually looked into potentially pursuing libel charges over, but found the logistics to be involved overwhelming. Just as a note, I didn't look into potentially taking legal action because of said remarks' impact on myself. I looked into it due to the potential impact it could have on the other people working on this channel. Contrary to what Maxine Esmay asserts, I am not Essenceofthought. My name is Peter/Ethel Thurston. I am the founder and co-administrator of Essenceofthought, and I have a responsibility to others on my team. So I'll play that one first and return to discuss it before going on to the next.
This man, Essenceofthought, we're going to listen to a bunch of him lying about history and lying about history to grind only one possible axe: his complete contempt and hatred of Christians and Jews, but definitely a hatred for Jews or for Christians. There's no difference between this man and a member of the KKK. There's no difference between this man and a communist. There's no difference between this man and a Nazi, because he lies about history and lies about innocent people, just like all of the above did. And I truly think that this man and his fans, if you were seeing Christians being strung up on trees, their children tortured, and their churches burned down, this man would think it was ultimately for the best, or certainly his fans would be, because this is just how hateful this guy is.
Now, I should note that in the chat, Shannon Q, one of the hosts for the Heathen Hour podcast, had the unfortunate displeasure of speaking up in my defense and was abused live by Maxine Esmay for having the audacity to question things such as the claims that I, as well as my viewers, have a desire or would at least feel some sort of joy or accomplishment at the sight of Christians hanging from trees and their children being tortured. As for the claim itself, what exactly should I say? Maxine Esmay has fabricated charges against me. He's nothing more than a putrid liar that cries about the atheist victim mentality, as we're about to see more of in a second, before warping reality to invert the real power struggle we see. It was not Christians who were being executed by atheists in the UK for being Christian up until 1697. That was Thomas Aikenhead, executed for having the audacity to question the legitimacy of Christ amongst his so-called friends. It wasn't Christians who were being hunted down, arrested and tortured as part of McCarthyism. That was atheist, feminist, LGBT+ activist and all the people you would happily abuse at the drop of a hat. And I mean abuse, not critique. It wasn't Christians who were and still are thought of as monsters in the United States of America. That was atheist, having been the most hated group in the US until 2014, where Islam overtook them. That's 13 years into the post-9/11 world, and they were only just surpassed by Islam, a fact that remains true as of 2017. Keep this in mind with the shit that Maxine Esmay is about to try. Now the next segment is rather long, being more than 5 minutes in length, but I guarantee you, this is one of the most revealing segments I have ever had the displeasure of sharing with you on this channel. I needed to give you Maxine Esmay's closing comments as a whole, unedited in any way, so you not only get the true nature of the threat he made that we played at the start, but also his character as a whole. Please note that those of you with auditory sensitivity may wish to reduce your audio either now or when the little on-screen video timer reaches 1 hour, 45 minutes and 41 seconds. The sentence thereafter starts out plainly, but takes a turn that some of you may find painful. I repeat, when the little black timer I put on the Google Hangout reaches 1 hour, 45 minutes and 41 seconds. I wanted to leave it unedited to retain the true impact of the hatred Max Dean Esmay holds not just for myself, but my viewers and our desire to maintain religious equality, which is predicated on solid state-church separation, and is the very anger his threat follows on from.
Seriously, I mean it. I mean it in the deepest possible terms. Essence of Thought. I grew up in the south side, on the south side of Chicago in the 1970s, where on Western Avenue, there on 73rd Street, if a black person walked on the wrong side of the street, he would get his ass kicked. But that also happened to the white kids who went on the wrong side. And I actually grew up and knew neo-Nazis. I mean, if you look up, there was something called Rockwell Hall on, I think, 73rd Street near Western Avenue in Chicago in the 1970s, which was the headquarters of the famed Illinois Nazi Party. And I literally grew up within a few blocks of that. I grew up within a few blocks of something called Marquette Park, which you can also look up, which is where race riots happened, where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and others got beat up for, civil rights demonstrations on behalf of black people. And I've known actual neo-Nazis, read their literature, hung out with them. Known actual, I mean, I literally, I have a weird reaction when people are, who's the white nationalist everybody talks about right now? Richard Spencer. I grew up as a teenager hanging out with guys like Richard Spencer, and I knew them intimately. You're as hateful or more hateful than them, and you're just as dishonest. And as a Christian,
here's my final.
Well, go ahead, because I got a few more things to say. Go ahead.
Don't you love the double standards that when Christians and Christianity in general contributed to society, it had nothing to do with it? Christianity had nothing to do with it, but if Christians did something bad, it was all Christianity's fault.
That's right. Just like when atheists do bad things, the atheism was never at fault. But when good things happened, it was because of the atheism. That's right. Part of their little religion, they don't acknowledge. Go ahead.
When they rewrite history, it seems that history is entirely in their favor. Doesn't that seem mighty suspicious?
Always. And we haven't even gotten into the atheist victim narrative yet. But I'm going to say it again, son. I want to finish.
They have it worse than the Jews,
Yes, because you're atheist. It was even worse for the atheists than it was for the Jews this last 2,000 years. It was just worse. Of course, I don't know. It's a toss-up. Was it worse for women the last 2,000 years, or was it worse for atheists the last 2,000 years, or was it worse for brown people? I don't know.
The atheists had it worse. They'll tell you.
Son, it's not. This is no longer, you one 25-year-old do another. Now, of course, now you're an aging hipster, a millennial nearing middle age and wondering what your relevance is. That's okay. I'm a Gen Xer and I have no relevance apparently. But no. I talk now to people younger than you, Essence of Thought, who get slapped around and even beat up for being caught wearing a cross or wanting to pray. I talk to people younger than you in the United States and Canada that's happening to. It's not just me getting mocked on the internet. It's people I know, men I know, women I know being beat up, you motherfucker.
Whoa.
Beat up for praying. No.
Settle down, Maxie.
Shut up. Beat up for praying. Beat up for being Catholic. Beat up for being Catholic. Chicago, Canada, and other places. Beat up for it. And by the way, you, sir, come from a country, England, with not the greatest history of how it treats Catholics. I have a child, sir, who now faces being beat up and ostracized and mistreated because of people like you. And by the way, someone send it to that cunt girl writes what, and to that hypocrite Paul Elam on Twitter, because we're banned for hurting atheist feelings. Tell me what you think of my child facing shit like that when you put out propaganda like this. You're not funny anymore. You're not 21 years old and laughing at your mother and your grandmother. This has real world implications, and people are getting hurt because of the shit you're putting out. What are you doing about it? That's all I have to say. Yeah, I am ending on an angry note. I'm very angry, and I have every right to be angry. So call me crazy for being angry. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends or enemies, and tell me why every Christian on the planet shouldn't view Essence of Thought and his fans as enemies and deal with them accordingly as the enemies they appear to want to be. That's my question. Tweet it out and call me crazy. Also send it to Steve McRae and ask him what he thinks.
So where does one begin with everything that has just been asserted here? Well, how about with the fact that the notion that Christians are being beat up as part of some mass cultural shift? That just isn't true. That is not what we're seeing at all in the current political climate. If he'd been talking about trans people, then maybe he'd be onto something. But he's not. He's on about the very people currently in power, the ones abusing not just atheists, but every demographic that is not them, including the aforementioned trans people who woke up recently to discover that their current government's attempts to erase all acknowledgement of their existence has kicked things into a whole new gear. And the difference is, I can fucking demonstrate that. All you can do is give some vague anecdotes which, even if they were true, the claims you draw from them are so spurious that it's a wonder to watch you attempt it. Do you know people who have been assaulted for being Christian? Possibly. I'm not the one who's going to say otherwise. Is this indicative of a cultural shift in the United States of America? Absolutely not. Not even close. Do note, I'm also not going to say that what happened was wrong, if indeed you do know some Christians who were assaulted, since I don't know the context of said assault. You see, there's something we see in many Christians that Maxine Esmay embodies right here in this very segment, and that's their sense of entitlement. Christians not only believe they deserve some special treatment in regards to the law, being exempt from it in many ways, including but not restricted to violations of both the civil and human rights of fellow citizens and the sanctification of child abuse, as seen with the torture of LGBT+ children, but they actually hold to the idea that they have the quote, right to abuse, to assault, to hate upon others, and the moment that said demographic makes a stand and fights back, that's Christian persecution. Christian persecution is best defined as the Christian's victim not meekly accepting their abuse. Take Maxine Esmay here as my prime example. I've had a single interaction with him about the video this hangout was intended to respond to. By the way, please go and watch the video itself to see whether what I said came anywhere close to the hate-fueled propaganda he's screaming on about, as I'm really interested to get your thoughts on that. Link down below as always. And yes, I responded rather flippantly to Maxine Esmay's comment. After all, I had some complete stranger who I'd previously seen videos of but never actually talked to come out of nowhere and tell me that quote, "Christian hating is all atheists really have to offer. Hate propaganda like this shows why it's right for religious people to dislike, mistrust and avoid atheists. Tonight we'll be doing a response video to this odious propaganda. Just so everyone knows, if you watch this video, it literally made you more ignorant and stupid. More on how tonight." End quote. To which I responded to with quote, "I gave evidenced arguments. You're the only spiteful one here, though I look forward to seeing whether you can turn a leaf in your video, possibly taking one from me and secular thought in general, to present evidence-based reasoning." End quote. And reflecting on that, I think I was rather laid back, not to mention justified, in that response. And yet, just as the misnamed men's rights movement completely inverses reality with feminism, Maxine Esmay sets out to portray me as someone who is not only the same as a Nazi, a KKK member, or a tankie, which could be brushed off as some ignorant Godwin-style hyperbole, but makes very specific claims about how I would apparently enjoy the lynching of Christians and the torture of their children. How people like me are responsible for the stories he forwards, which, first of all, lack validation, but more importantly, even if they were true, in no way shows what he's pretending they show. To throw out that atheists have a victim complex, the same talking point used for women, when either group notes the historical fact surrounding theocracy and patriarchy, before going on to fabricate an actual victim narrative with no relation to reality, is incredibly hypocritical. What I also find incredibly short-sighted is the way in which in the Hangout, their number one argument against Hitler being Christian, in spite of him clearly declaring himself such, both in public and in private, is the way in which Hitler treated other established denominations. And just in this segment, Maxine Esmay mentions Britain's historic treatment of Catholics, most famous of which is Henry VIII during the English Reformation, not to mention the back and forth between his children, which gave us the English Church. It's almost as if Christians killing other types of Christian in no way stops said Christians from being Christian themselves. The only difference between Henry VIII and Hitler in this regard is that Hitler's Nazi Reformation failed where Henry VIII's succeeded. In the same vein, I was talking to White Injun, one of the apologists in the stream who considers himself a history expert and has now rebranded his channel history.net. Now, he made a similar argument in how Hitler couldn't be Christian since Moses, along with the prophets of the Old Testament, were Jewish. Now, in the original video they responded to, I went over blood libel, a segment they actively cut out in the Hangout before accusing me of failing to evidence my conclusion based on said segment they cut out. But I just wanted to make a point, so I asked him about whether he'd ever heard of this Christian anti-Semite by the name of Martin Luther. I noted the fact that he's kind of a big deal in the non-Catholic, non-Orthodox community, and a major inspiration for the Nazi rhetoric, especially Kristallnacht, a Nazi-staged uprising designed to give the appearance of the general populace rising up against the Jews. This was heavily drawn from Martin Luther's 1543 pamphlet titled On the Jews and Their Lies. The Nazis also glorified Martin Luther in various other ways throughout their reign. Well, he'd make it appear like Christians can still be Christian in spite of being raging anti-Semites. And this was something he just couldn't recover from, instead being forced to flounder about, simply because his knowledge of history is so void and yet the Dunning-Kruger effect is in full flower within him, as well as this lot in general. Now, something I'd be incredibly interested to ask Maxine Esmay about are his opinions on the facts that atheists often have the facts that they're atheist used against them in court whilst seeking child custody. I mention this as one of Maxine Esmay's core issues with feminism is the gender gap in child custody. Now, what's interesting in the gender gap scenario is the fact that feminists are actually challenging this every time they push the facts that women are not merely child-rearing baby cannons. That's what this gap is founded on. Institutional sexism against women, which just so happens to arguably come out in their favour in this one instance. You see, it not only impacts custody rights, it also impacts other things, such as the wage gap. Whilst a quarter to just over a third of the raw wage gap is a direct wage gap, a gap that exists for no other reason than the gender of the person being paid, the other 65.1 to 76.4% is the result of secondary factors. The three most notable of said factors all centre around expectations and demands placed on women surrounding both having and rearing children. Now, said report just assumes these to be the naturally occurring differences between men and women. However, that's not the case. Women are viewed as having a social responsibility to, first of all, bear children, and then sacrifice their career to care for them. Those that fail to do either are often viewed with disdain and even open social hostility. It's a fact that's become such an invasive part of our life that complete strangers feel it acceptable to demand women explain why they don't seem to be planning on having children. As for those who have children yet still work, not only do they face social hostility in form of often being designated as selfish for wanting to maintain a career. It's been found that mothers are more likely to be rejected for a job than matching CVs of childless women, as well as both childless men and fathers. So the narrative of choice, which is already dubious, thoroughly dies by that point. And this is something feminism is actively fighting against, something that will not only decrease the wage gap, but also disparity found in custody cases. And yet people like Maxine Esmay like to pretend that feminists are the root of these issues when both the science and the history don't bear that out. It's the patriarchy, plain and simple. Meanwhile, the same cannot be said to be true of atheists. They've never had the power. America has been dictated by the religious demands of Christians for centuries, in spite of the fact that it was founded as a secular nation. So atheists, who do not indoctrinate their children using threats of hellfire dressed up as love, which is abusive by very nature, who don't worship a book that, like the Bible, details not only God allowing for child rape, but specifying the 30-day wait period a good Christian must hold to before carrying out said child rape. The ones who don't believe in these things are the ones being painted as a risk to children, if not physically, then at least morally. Now, I don't think Maxine Esmay will have a good answer. Holding to the reality of the situation is clearly not one of his strong suits, and I don't think he actually cares about the children. I mean, what he did in the previous segment was effectively use his child as a human shield to ward off criticism. That to me doesn't speak to a genuine concern. Indeed, Maxine Esmay must invert reality to match his narrative, which is possibly why he gets so angry at those who can study and reference said reality, not only libeling them by claiming truly horrendous things about them without basis, but actually ending on a threat. And I have to ask, was it worth it? If you don't quite realise, you haven't got me to back down. Hi there. I'd just like to say a few things here at the end of the video before you go. First, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever donated to the channel via Patreon, giving a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Alexia Richardson, John Schoenrock, Alexander Williams, and Daniel Martinez. Your support has ensured this channel its ability to grow over the years, and really is the only thing that manages to keep the channel afloat. I'd also like to ask that you comment down below and like this video, as well as subscribe and follow Essence of Thought on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Please also consider following Atheist Alliance International on Facebook, an organisation dedicated to helping atheists around the globe. Any comments utilising language which insults others on the basis of perceived gender, sexuality, ethnicity or ability both mental and physical will be removed immediately, and the commenter may be blocked on the moderator's discretion. Let's keep this space one which upholds the humanist values. Thank you.